Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining our virtual Hill Day Advocacy Training webinar. I know a lot of you already, but for those of you who I have not had the opportunity to chat with yet, I'm Libby Marking. I'm the Director of Government Affairs for the National Wildlife Refuge Association, and I'm based here in DC. Yeah, so I really appreciate you guys joining on for this webinar. Hopefully, as you know, this webinar is really mostly tailored for those who are participating in congressional meetings this week that we at the Refuge Association have set up as part of virtual Hill Days. However, we did want to have everybody invited to participate in this training because it hopefully will be a good resource, and we do want to encourage everybody to go forth on your own and make meetings on your own and become more effective advocates. So we wanted to invite everyone to this meeting, but please do just be aware that this is really tailored for the folks who will be meeting with their congressional representatives on the Hill this week. So I am going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so the meeting will run maybe about an hour and a half. It might be a little bit less than that, but that's what we're planning for. So we'll start with a bit of well, we kind of already did the welcome and introduction, so we'll move on past that. We'll go into a bit of the policy background that you will need to know moving into your meetings with congressional offices this week. Then we'll chat a bit about the difference between lobbying and advocacy, because that does have some impacts on you as 50C3 organizations, 501c3. And then we'll go into what a meeting with Congress actually looks like how you set that meeting up, how do you conduct it, some helpful tips as you go into those meetings, things like that. And then for those who have meetings scheduled already for this week, we're going to put you into breakout rooms so that you have a chance to chat with the folks who will be in your meetings with you, which will be helpful, especially if you don't know each other yet. So get a chance to introduce yourselves, work through, how your run of show will go and how you want to kind of divide up the talking points amongst yourselves. So you'll have that opportunity to do that. But for those who aren't, participating in those meetings, you can just hang out with me for those 15 minutes in the main room and ask me questions or just chit chat, whatever you like. And then at the very end, we'll save some time for general questions. So let's get started with all that. Okay, so first things first, why are we advocating? Why are we doing Hill Days? A big part of why we wanted to do this now and get everybody kind of geared up, meeting with their members of Congress, specifically the targets we have right now are those who sit on the Senate and House Appropriations Committees, specifically the Interior Appropriations Committees, because appropriations bills are still in negotiations, but they won't be for much longer. And August recess, which is when members of Congress and their staff go back for the whole month or just a week or so, back to their state or district to do those visits in districts. So we wanted to give you this resource and this training ahead of time of that, so you have an opportunity to invite members of Congress or their staff over to your refuge. And CORFA, the Coalition of Refuge Friends and Advocates, has recently put out a Congressional Recess Action Toolkit, which hopefully you received. And we'll go into that a little bit more as well. But yeah, so timing wise, we felt this was a good time to do this training and get you in touch with your members of Congress. And then secondly, which is also very, very, very important, is the refuge system needs your voice to protect it from the current threat that it's facing of budget cuts. And we really just need to put in that work at the grassroots and local level to uplift the refuge system and educate members of Congress so that, despite the current budget cuts we're facing, in the future, when there is more opportunity to increase the refuge system budget, now we've already laid the groundwork for members of Congress to understand what the issues are, and they have more incentive to prioritize it amongst all the other priorities that they have within their districts. So we really want to, help you build that relationship with those congressional offices, with that staff, and really just empower you to be as best advocates as you can, and hopefully to encourage others to participate in advocacy as well. It's I, as a DC lobbyist, don't have the same impacts that you all do when you talk with members of Congress. I don't have the stories you have. I don't have the, local anecdotes. So it's my voice in this whole process is not that interesting. So it really needs to come from you. And so, yeah, we're really trying to put some more resources out there for you, and make sure that you have everything you need to make these meetings effective. And like I said, legislators, they want to hear from you. So yeah, here's just some statistics that lay that out pretty well. I think you all know that that the best advocacy comes from the ground up, right? So before we go into the policy background, hopefully you all saw the email that went out about an hour before this started that has the resources you need, and had a chance to look through those a little bit. So you've got the fact sheet about the National Wildlife Refuge System as a whole. You've got the fact sheet on the funding challenges facing the refuge system. And then also sent along the talking points / run of show, which really are just guidelines. It's not prescriptive, they're just guidelines. But if you have a chance to look through those, definitely please do. Before we go into the breakout session, just so you have an idea of how this will actually run. So, and then I also sent along the schedule as it currently stands, and that's a living schedule. It might change. We still have some meetings that are tentative. We're still trying to get on the board. So yeah, just if you're still waiting for a meeting, just keep an eye out on that. But of course, you'll hear from us when that meeting is scheduled as well. Okay, so let's go into the policy background. Now, I wanted to preface everything before we got into that our ask for Congress this year has very recently changed. And we'll go into the reason why that is. But I wanted to put this in your head so that you can have this context as we go through the policy background. So the current ask that we have for Congress is to reject any proposed cuts to the refuge system budget in FY24. Now, this is different from our asks in previous years, even just as long as a few months ago, which typically we're stating, we want X amount of dollars for the refuge system in FY24, right? Like we're asking for an increase. So our current ask has changed. And like I said, we'll go into the reason why that is in a bit. But we are still giving that big picture future funding level that we actually want, which is at least 1.5 billion in annual appropriations for refuge system operations and maintenance. And we'll talk about that a bit more as well. Okay, so here are some key appropriations figures for the refuge system that you should know. And operations and maintenance, refuge system operations and maintenance is the primary account that the refuge system gets their funding from. The refuge system has a couple different places that they get funding. It's not all under operations and maintenance, but by and large, that is the main account. So that's the one that we advocate for primarily. So the FY23 appropriations level, which is the current funding level, sits at 542 million. Now, this is actually a relatively good increase from FY22 in comparison to previous years, but it still is only a $39 million increase since FY2010. So big picture, it hasn't really raised all that much. And when you account for inflation over the last 13 years, this, even though we've had a bit of a minor increase, it actually translates into a real loss of about 160 million. So, we're losing money every year that the funding does not increase. And then the other figure that I thought might be helpful for you to know is the president's FY24 budget proposal. The budget proposal is just like a wish list that the president puts out, stating his ideal funding numbers for various programs. So that included 625 million for the refuge system, and that's a pretty good increase as well. The administration definitely was working to get that increase even higher from previous year proposals. So it is on their radar. Okay, so those are a couple figures that you should know. Specifically, that first one you should know kind of off the top of your head as you go into these meetings. Okay, so this graph, which is included on the funding challenges fact sheet, this is a really helpful graph to illustrate how funding levels over the years haven't kept up with inflation. So that green level there, which is the enacted funding levels over the years, it shows, funding level kind of went down and then has slowly crept back up to where it was in FY 2010, and now we've gone a little bit higher. So when you take into account inflation, as mentioned, the 503 million appropriated to the refuge system in FY 2010 is now worth nearly 700 million today. So we've definitely fallen behind the mark there. Now, for reference, throughout this presentation and in a lot of the messaging and materials we use, I reference FY 2010 a lot because that was, at the time, the high watermark for the refuge system in terms of funding. That was the highest level it had seen by that point. So we kind of reference everything to that because it's a good baseline. So this is, obviously showing inflation. Something it doesn't cover, though, is it doesn't really talk about, fixed costs that the refuge system has every year. Something like base salary increases that are across the board for all federal employees. So, it costs, okay, for every 1%, 1% increase in federal pay raises, it costs the refuge system about 3 million for every 1%. 3 million for every 1% raise in payroll costs. So in FY22, they had a 1% scheduled federal wage increase. The increased appropriations that they got that year didn't even cover that. And so just this last January, federal employees got a 4.6% federal wage increase. So, that little increase that we got last year in funding is already getting chipped away by just these fixed costs. So something we also kind of want to talk about as we advocate is that at least, we want base increases in funding every year to cover these fixed costs that we have no control over. So so that's something to keep in mind as well. So despite all these funding challenges that the refuge system has had, it has seen incredible growth as well since FY 2010. So we've had 14 new refuge units. We've gotten hundreds of millions of acres of marine national monuments. You have new services like the Urban Wildlife Conservation Program, which has drastically changed the way that conservation is delivered to communities across the United States. And you've also seen a large increase in visitors to the refuge system, to the tune of 67 million visitors in FY22, and that number is expected to increase every year. So we've seen a lot of good growth in that time. Now that growth is awesome for the refuge system. It really, is so important to us meeting conservation goals for the country. But it does put more strain on the Fish and Wildlife Service and the staff that they have, given the funding challenges that they have. So they're really having to do a lot more with a lot less. So that's translated over the years to a loss of 800 permanent staff since FY 2011, which is an enormous 25% loss in capacity. So those decreasing budgets have led to having to de-staff refuges, having to close certain refuges to the public. And in many cases, refuges have been combined into refuge complexes where they share remaining staff, and the staff that they have to sometimes drive, hours and hours and hours a day just going between refuges. So that's the current situation that they're under. Now, about 54% of all refuges are not staffed at all, and no refuge is fully staffed. Okay, those are pretty bad circumstances. This chart on the right here shows, which is also on the back sheet, it shows the staffing levels compared to from FY 2011 to FY 22, and then it'll go into the actual needs. So this breaks it down by the sub-activities within the refuge system. So refuge maintenance staff, refuge visitor services staff, law enforcement, your wildlife and habitat management staff. So in FY 2011, we had 3,244 full-time employees. And then as of FY 22, there was a decrease down to 2,424. So it's a pretty big loss. Now, the Refuge Association has estimated the actual needs for staffing to be at, like, if the refuge system was operating at its ideal capacity, we've been able to estimate that would be about 7,300 full-time employees. And when we average salary data, we can estimate that the refuge system would need an additional 560 million to hire enough staff to reach the actual capacity needs for the refuge system. Now, the Refuge Association has really tried to focus our messaging and our advocacy and our campaigns around staffing this year for a couple of reasons. One, it's really indicative of the funding challenges that the refuge system has seen. It's very tangible. It's easily understood. And staffing is related to everything that happens on the refuge system. So it's something that's easy to understand. Now, Congress, we know that Congress has the will to address staffing challenges on public land systems, because when the Inflation Reduction Act was passed last year, they included 500 million for the National Park Service to hire staff, to hire more staff. Now, it's great for the National Park Service. However, the refuge system did not receive any kind of funding to do the same thing, even though our staffing challenges are, the same or likely even worse. So that's a big reason, again, why we're trying to do this, is because Congress in general isn't really prioritizing the refuge system amongst all of their other public lands priorities. And the refuge system isn't considered in a lot of the conversations that they have when we're talking about outdoor access, when we're talking about biodiversity and climate, all of those issues. So a lot of what we have to do is educate Congress and staff about these facts and figures, all these challenges that the refuge system has faced, so that they have, the context that they need to really push this issue forward and start working towards the actual funding level we need. Okay. So included here are some examples of what those impacts are from understaffing, and these are examples that you can use yourself as you're talking about this issue. So from that chart, you could see that we currently have 214 law enforcement officers, and they're patrolling all 850 million acres of land and water within the refuge system. Now, when you exclude the water acres, that's an average of 440,000 acres per officer, which leaves much of the refuge system virtually unprotected. I like to include this data point because when speaking to certain offices, particularly Republican offices, this law enforcement issue is something that really resonates. And it's something that like when we're talking, at least in my experience, when I'm talking to staff about this and I start talking about law enforcement, that's when I start getting the ears perked up. That's when I start getting, questions asked. And I have seen that certain offices have done that follow-up with Fish and Wildlife Service to learn more about the issue. So I wanted to include this and let you guys know that, if you're meeting with Republican members of Congress, this is perhaps something that you want to start talking about and give some anecdotes about and talk about the impacts that you're seeing on your refuge. Okay, now something that you all probably have some experience with is because of the lack of supervision from professional full-time staff, many volunteer programs have been cut back or completely eliminated because of that lack of supervision. And that volunteers, they do a lot of work on refuges, but they can't do everything, right? So they need that supervision from professional full-time staff to do certain activities. So that's a major impact on refuge work as well. Another example, so more than 40% of refuges have an outdated comprehensive conservation plan or no plan at all. This is an issue that a lot of our partner organizations, folks like Defenders, Trout Unlimited, this is an issue that they really focus on in their messaging. Like the planning issue is something that they focus on more so than the staffing issue. And then lastly, obviously, because of lack of funding, there's a growing maintenance backlog and a certain loss of biodiversity that we're experiencing as well. So the current deferred maintenance backlog for the refuge system amounts to 1.6 billion, which is pretty massive. And that amount is going to grow every single year unless Fish and Wildlife Service starts getting allocated much more funding for addressing that backlog. Yep. Okay. Now, remember I talked about the current ask and the big picture ask. So there, like I said, there's a very recent reason why we're now changing what the ask is for Congress, and that's because of the debt ceiling agreement that was passed in Congress, I think at the end of May, maybe early June. And it included some provisions that really changed the budget and appropriations landscape over the next couple of years. So the main thing to know is that the debt ceiling agreement keeps funding for non-defense agencies, so agencies like the Department of the Interior, relatively the same as the FY23 funding levels. So it'll keep things basically flat at current funding levels. Okay, and that is in effect through FY24. And then in FY25, the budget caps would be raised by 1%. And then after that, there are no more budget caps. Now, keep in mind, even though we have budget caps, there's nothing that says that we have to actually fund programs at the actual caps. It's very possible it can go below the budget caps and not even reach them. So keep that in mind as well. Another provision that the agreement had was that the bill had that Congress has to approve all 12 appropriations bills by the end of the year. And if they fail to do that, which Congress usually does, an automatic 1% cut will be imposed on all discretionary funding. So that includes refuge system funding. And so that would probably bring us closer to FY22 funding levels. As far as I know, or as far as I've heard, the Fish and Wildlife Service hasn't received any kind of guidance on how this situation might trickle down through their programs. They haven't really received a whole lot of guidance on it, and they haven't had internal discussions about it yet. So, I don't have much to share on that other than they haven't received any guidance on how this affects them. So, oops. Okay. So looking forward, here's a couple things to know about what we can expect moving forward for the rest of the year. So government funding will run out on October 1st. And at that point, Congress is likely to, again, pass a short-term spending bill, which they usually do. Those are called continuing resolutions or CRs. And that will keep agencies open and running and funded at the current funding levels. It'll just kind of keep things going. And they'll pass as many of those as they need. Some, it can be last for 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, et cetera. So we'll at least see one probably, but we might see multiple. And then at some point we'll see the catch-all spending bill, which is called an omnibus. So, the process isn't really changing that much from what Congress usually does. It's just the purpose of this was to put more pressure on Congress to actually follow the budget schedule that they should be. So, it's a good thing, but it's also a bad thing considering these caps that we now have to face. So what we can expect is the House will likely propose appropriations bills with spending levels lower than the budget caps, lower than current funding levels. However, the Senate is likely to pass bills that have higher funding levels. If not at the caps, then maybe just a little bit below. But when House and Senate eventually comes together to reconcile the differences between their bills, we'll probably get something in between their two numbers. So that's what we can expect. Again, it's not super different from previous years. It's just now we're dealing with this flat line kind of cap on funding, and then this threat of an automatic percentage cut to all discretionary funding. So that's what the agreement does, and that's why our ask for Congress this year is changing to be something a little bit different. Okay, so for reference here for you, in case it's helpful, this green column here is the FY23 enacted funding levels. These are the current funding levels per sub-activity for the refuge system. And then just as reference there, I also included the FY22 enacted levels and the president's request for FY23, just for comparison. So, when we talk about flatlining funding levels, you could probably expect it to be somewhere close to these levels. So again, the current ask is to reject any proposed cuts to the refuge system budget as we're in this process. Now that's the ask, but we don't want to lose our eye on the ball that refuge system funding is way below where it needs to be. So we're still trying to put that message out there that refuge system operations and maintenance funding needs to be at least 1.5 billion to be considered, adequate or sufficient funding. So, as we try and talk about both of those things in the same sentence, it's kind of like, educating about here's the real need, but we understand the restrictions that you're under. So our ask is just to protect the refuge system with everything you can and make sure that it doesn't get any cuts for the next year or two. So that's the ask, and that's why things have kind of changed a little bit. Okay, now I mentioned that as 501c3 organizations, you do have to be mindful about the difference between lobbying and advocacy, because that can have impact on your tax exempt status, things like that. So I'm trying to lay out here to make it pretty clear what the difference is. So lobbying, which is what we are doing with this ask, is trying to influence a politician or a public official on a particular piece of legislation or regulations. So there are some examples here of what that actually looks like. So like I said, what we're doing this week and making that ask for the appropriations bills is considered lobbying. Now, advocacy, on the other hand, is just educating Congress or their staff about certain ideas, educating about the benefits of the refuge system or the challenges that you face within your particular refuge, things like that. So unless you're talking about a specific piece of legislation, like asking them to support or oppose something, it's probably considered advocacy. So an example there of what advocacy looks like compared to lobbying is increased funding is necessary to complete restoration projects on the Occoquan Bay. So we're not mentioning, a specific bill. We're not mentioning a specific funding number. It's just general, here's the reality of what the situation is, right? So it's just educating. Okay, so we have Joan on from Corfa, who can go into a little bit more detail about the lobbying regulations that you need to be aware of as with your organization. So I'll turn it over to Joan, and I can move slides forward for you if you like.
Yeah, that would be great. So with regards to lobbying, remember with lobbying, there's 3 components to it: that you're making an ask for something specific. You're making that ask to someone who can make the decision, a lawmaker or a member of the staff. And of course, I forgot the third one, but you have to have these 3 components. And Libby, I don't know if you've got that other slide that shows it.
I'm sorry, that one came out. I figured that was covered in my slide.
Yeah, I'll make sure that you guys get it, but you're making a specific ask, you're telling them how you want them to vote, and you're talking to your decision maker, the lawmaker or their staff. And if it's something like a ballot measure, you're talking to your community saying, hey, this is how we want you to vote. And there's 2 forms of lobbying that you need to think about. It's direct lobbying, where you're communicating with that decision maker, or you're communicating with a broader community and you're telling them, we want you to go and influence a decision maker. And that's called grassroots lobbying. So Libby, do you want to move it to the next slide? You have to, as a 501c3, be aware that there are limits on how much lobbying you can do. You know, how much, I think the IRS calls it propaganda. You know, can't be a substantial portion of your business. So there's 2 ways for you to look at this. There is a very simple way. You fill out one IRS form called 5768. Believe it or not, it only is a half a page form. Didn't think IRS did something like that, did you? But basically it says that you only count your expenditures. What have you paid for? You know, so if you are an all volunteer organization and you send someone to talk to your member of Congress at their district office, what's the expense? Maybe their parking, maybe their mileage, but you're not paying for their time. So this is just a very easy way for you to keep track of how much lobbying you're doing, to make sure that you don't get into any conflict with the IRS, because like I say, it can't be a substantial portion of your business. But like for most of us, we're not $500,000 organizations. If you have filled out the 5768 and sent it in, up to 20% of your expenditures can be for lobbying. Okay, that's a lot of money. The chances of you ever reaching that are not terribly great. But within that, only so much of it can be grassroots lobbying. So just be aware of these, and these slides will be sent out. Libby, you want to move on to the next one? Okay. Another thing to be aware of too, since you have an agreement with Fish and Wildlife Service, that in your Friends Partnership Agreement, there is one clause, and it's in section 5A13, where it says that you cannot do any lobbying on service managed land. These are prohibited activities on service managed land. Can you do advocacy? Yes, you can. You just can't do the lobbying. You can go outside the gate. You can talk about specific asset outside the gate, but not on the property. You can invite your member of Congress or their staff to coffee and talk about that. You can also, you know, if they ask you questions, such as Libby's example about Occoquan, you know, they ask you a question about that, you can answer, because you're just educating them about the situation. So that's the Friends Partnership Agreement and some regulations on your lobbying. Any questions about that? So I see a question: if you don't have any costs for lobbying, do you still need to fill out the form? My recommendation to you, and mind you, I'm not a lawyer, it would be yes, fill out the form, because if you don't, then there is another way to track the amount of lobbying that you do that the IRS would require you to do. And that's called the substantial test. And basically it says you have to account for both your time and your expenditures, and it can't be, your expenditures on lobbying can't be anything substantial. But they don't define what substantial is, okay? So in some cases, they've said 5%. Someone tried 15% and they were like, no way. But there's nothing that clearly defines it. And most experts say anywhere from 3 to 5%. But like I say, you have to count both your time and your money. With this form 5768, the expenditure reporting, you just report what you've actually spent. Okay. So anything else? Oh, what's the purpose of this prohibition? We don't get in, you know, we as 501c3s, we don't get into the politics, and we just want to make sure that as a 501c3, you're really carrying out the mission of your organization. And if your mission is, you know, politics or something like that, you're not a 501c3, you would be a 501c4, I believe it is. So that's part of the reason for the prohibition. But if you don't lobby and just advocate, do you still need to fill out the form? No, you don't. No. Okay, because you have nothing to report. So you wouldn't need to fill out the form, but I do suggest the form is nice and easy. Okay. Campaigns versus lobbying. Cheryl, are you talking about political campaigns?
Yeah, I'm just to be clear that you can't campaign for a candidate.
No, as a 501c3, that you agree when you become a 501c3, you will not get into partisan politics. So you will not support a candidate or oppose a candidate. That's not part of our business.
Yeah, actually, I appreciate that question coming up because I inserted something here into your slides, Joan, about like, what do you do during an election year and you're suddenly interacting with candidates or people who are up for re-election. So this link will be available to you, of course, when we send this slideshow out to you, but it's just a resource that pretty clearly lays out the rules around how you actually talk to candidates during an election year. So something else to keep in mind, especially as we run into some re-election campaigns, things like that.
And I see a couple of more questions on this, so hopefully I get them all. If you're an all volunteer organization and not a 501c3, don't have tax exempt status from the IRS, do you need to fill out any of these forms? No, you're not a 501c3. You don't have to. You're just considered individuals, and individuals, all of us have First Amendment rights and we can speak up to what we want. Jonathan, our mission is to save an underfunded refuge. How do we do it without lobbying? You as a 501c3 do not give up your right to lobbying. That is a First Amendment right. The Congress actually encourages you to advocate, and advocacy can include lobbying about your mission. You can't support, I truly believe you can't support your mission without being advocates for your mission. So yes, you can lobby. You just have to make sure that you don't make it a substantial portion of your business. That's all. And I don't think any friends group has ever made it a substantial portion of our business. We have enough, a lot of other stuff to do too. Okay. All right.
Okay. Were those the last questions? John, I'm not looking at the chat. So
I'm just looking. Becca, I see, don't we endorse our refuge? And that is a service agency. Becca, if you could unmute yourself and just explain a little bit more about your question, love to hear it.
Can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you.
Hold on, I'm going to try to. Okay, there we go. I had a double click. Somebody posted a comment in there about saying that we don't endorse the service, that the Friends don't endorse the service, but the service is, our refuge is a part of the service, and don't the Friends endorse our refuge? Or are we using the word endorse in a different way?
I wonder what.
I think what it's talking about, it might be referring to this last part of the sentence on this slide here. And what it's saying here is just that whatever you can't lobby on service land, because it kind of implies that the service endorses whatever you're lobbying for. I think that's what it's saying there.
And Libby,
Right, but it also says, and do not express or imply involvement or endorsement of the service. Does that mean like we
Right.
can't say we're advocating for our refuge, but we're not lobbying for the I just lost it in my train of thought. It was better in my head.
you're advocating for the refuge. I think what this clause is really getting at is they don't want, the service doesn't want you to like, okay, you're acting as a mouthpiece for service staff. You're not asking service staff to do any brochures or anything else
Oh, right, okay.
for your efforts. You're not working under the direction of Fish and Wildlife Service with regards to your lobbying efforts.
Right. Got it. Thank you.
There's that wall put up between what you're doing and what this, because remember, service staff cannot lobby. They can support the president's budget, but that's all they can do. They can't, say, oh yeah, we need another $100 million over what the president wants. So they can't do anything like that.
Got it. Understood. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Libby, back to you.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you, Joan. This is all important stuff for you all to know, especially as you get more engaged in advocacy. But like Joan was saying, it's very unlikely that you'll reach that 20% threshold. So it's just something to be aware of. And here is the contact info for Corfa if you have further questions. And of course, there will be time at the end if Joan's staying on, that she can help answer some more as well. So, okay. All right, so let's go into actually meeting with Congress and things you need to know about that. And I apologize, I have a couple slides in here that are kind of wall of text like, so I apologize for that in advance, but all important information. So, first and foremost, scheduling a meeting is very, very simple. And in the recess action toolkit that Corfa sent out, it does have a template of what that can include and what that can look like. So please refer to that. And we'll link to that as well in this slideshow. So something to note, meetings can be both in DC or they can be in the district or the state. Now, members of Congress, their offices, they have both DC-based staff and district or state-based staff. And you need to know who to talk to get the result that you want. So for general relationship building, for providing like updates on the kind of work you're doing on the refuge or things that are happening on the refuge, or if there's casework, which is like you're experiencing an issue with a federal agency and you need help working it out, something like that, then that is the work of district staff. Okay. But for anything regarding like influencing policy and legislation, things like advocacy, then you want to talk to the DC staff. So you just need to know who to actually reach out to so you can get there faster and be more likely to get a reply. So to get the name and email address of the staffer that you need, you can call, they have multiple offices, so you need to get the right phone number. It's always on their website. And just ask whoever picks up the phone for the name and the email address of the scheduler if you're trying to make a meeting with a member of Congress. And also keep in mind there's a DC scheduler and a district or state scheduler. So usually two schedulers dividing that out. Or you need the staffer who handles, it's usually under public lands, natural resources, environment. It's usually one of those three. So they're very happy to share the email address for who handles that. So it's just a faster way to get in touch with who you actually need to get in touch with versus, going on their website and filling out the generic form that they have and waiting and hoping for a reply, because that goes through a completely different process before it even gets to any appropriate staffer. So it's much better just to figure out the actual email address you need and do that direct outreach. Okay, yep, I mentioned that there's both a DC-based and a state-based scheduler. And if you want that meeting with a member of Congress, please do that at least a month in advance for the best success, because their schedules fill up very, very quickly. And if you're not doing it at least a month in advance, odds are you're not getting them to come to your event or to come to your meeting. So, but for most of your communications, those like general update kind of things, just staying in touch with them and building that relationship. Staffers are usually your best points of contact, and they're much more flexible, much easier to get meetings with. So the people that you should really focus on trying to build that relationship with, because you'll talk to them most, would be the staffers. Okay. Now in your meeting request, and again, this is included in that template that Corfo put together, but you want to introduce yourself, your organization, make sure you mention the subject matter you want to talk about, how many attendees you anticipate. It's really important that they know that the people that will be in the meeting are actually constituents, otherwise they might ignore you. So that's why you want to provide, the names, affiliations, include the city that they live in, just so they can see that these are actual constituents who are trying to meet, right? And then try and be as flexible as you can. It's fine to have a specific date and time you want to meet, but try and provide like a time frame or other potential dates and times. And then of course, link to any relevant background that they might need beforehand to understand why you're actually asking for a meeting. And then in this age of COVID, make sure you note if you want a virtual or an in-person meeting. Okay. So with congressional offices, sometimes it's really difficult to get a response. Sometimes it's not something to get discouraged by. They just get a million emails a month, so you just need to be patient, be persistent. Follow up every week, and yeah, like I said, if you don't get a meeting with the legislator, it's pretty typical. If you get punted down to a staffer, don't be discouraged. It's really very normal. It doesn't mean they don't like you or don't want to meet with you. They're just very busy people. But rest assured that anything that you talk about in your meetings, the actual ask that you're bringing, or these are like important pieces of information, that all gets filtered up to members of Congress. So they'll hear you, they'll hear your message, so don't worry. Now, in the actual meeting, you do want to be early and be flexible. Sometimes schedules change in Congress very, very quickly, and you might get an email last minute asking to reschedule. So it's pretty typical, just be flexible. In this case, for our meetings for this week, we do want you to be early, hopping on to these Zoom meetings, just so you can once again kind of, make sure everything's working right, making sure you have a chance to chat a little bit amongst yourselves, make sure you're all on the same page. So I recommend hopping on 10 minutes before your scheduled meeting time to do that kind of prep and coordination, but that's just my recommendation. For these meetings, you do want to dress probably business casual. You want to have a nice background. I would recommend for Zoom, you can set your background to be blurred, or in my case, I have, a nice bird. So I have a nice background. The talking points that I passed along do at the top say defined roles. So roles are just, an easy way to designate, making sure that everything gets actually done. So you have a note taker, you have the facilitator who kind of keeps things on topic, and then you have a storyteller or multiple storytellers who can really illustrate, the importance of the refuge system and why it matters and why they should matter too. So yeah, just make sure those roles are understood by everybody before you go in. And of course, you want to stay on topic. The biggest thing you want to accomplish in every meeting is making that ask. It's so easy for congressional meetings to go off the rails and, just completely not follow what you thought you were going to talk about at all. But at some point, you just have to make sure that whatever ask you came in there to ask actually gets asked. And so, we know what the ask is for us. Typically, you want to kind of phrase it as like a yes or no question. In this case, with our ask of, please make sure that refuge system funding doesn't get decreased. In this case, I think it's probably better to state that ask and then try and get feedback from them on how they feel about it, or how their bosses might, move forward with that request, something like that. So not necessarily a yes or no question, but you do want to get some kind of feedback from them on how they feel about that ask. Right. Okay. So, oops. We have these fact sheets here for you that you are welcome to share, welcome to use over and over again. Make sure I'm going to be emailing all of the congressional offices that we have meetings for this week and making sure they have in advance these fact sheets that we provided for you. So they will have that in advance. However, in your follow-up with these offices, which you will be in charge of, you'll be in charge of doing the follow-up, make sure those get attached again, okay? Make sure you're flagging any questions that they have if you know it's something like a really substantive question that shows that they're interested. If you don't know the answer, don't worry about it. Just make a note of it, say you'll follow up, and then either figure it out yourself or you can flag it for me and I can work with you to figure out the answer to it. But yeah, we want to make sure that we're actually answering their questions that they have. Really importantly, as we talked about before, this is a very good opportunity to invite the member of Congress or their staff to visit your refuge. So at some point during the meeting, you need to do that as well. And then make sure that they know that right after the meeting, you're going to be following up with them / the scheduler to actually put in that formal request for a meeting. Okay, it's really important that we get these members of Congress out to the refuges so they can see for themselves just how important it is, and you know, make sure they establish some kind of personal connection with the refuge. Because if they don't know about it, then they're not going to do anything about it, right? So we really are trying to get many more members of Congress, make it a regular thing for them to go out to the refuges. If you know, obviously say thank you for taking time for the meeting. And if you're meeting in person, take a photo because it's good just to have in the archive, right? But it's good to post on social media as well afterwards and tag them and say thank you for coming out, things like that. It's just good, good to show publicly that you're having that kind of engagement. And then very importantly, after the meeting is done, send that follow-up email that recaps your discussion, answers any questions that they did have, sends those fact sheets again and any other resources that you learned might be helpful for them throughout your meeting. Make sure you do that relatively soon after your meeting's done. So within a couple days, preferably within a day. Okay. Now what to avoid? Definitely want to avoid jargon or making it too complex. Most congressional staffers fall somewhere between 20 and 30 years old. Lots of times these issues are new to them, or they're new to the office, or maybe they, you know, they just don't know anything about the refuge system really. So you just want to avoid making it, yeah, too complex. The simpler it is for them to follow and understand, the better it is, because otherwise they're just kind of like zone out and then the message is gone, right? So just make it as simple as you can and easy to follow. Definitely don't argue, even if you're having disagreements. Try not to spend too much time on tangents. Always try and come back to the original ask, the original talking points. Try and always come back to that if you know you're straying a little bit too far. Definitely don't worry about knowing the answer to something if they ask you a question. Definitely don't make up an answer. Always just say, you know, I'm not sure, but I can definitely find out and get back to you. Easy as that. And something I caution about is being disappointed if the meeting doesn't really go the way you were envisioning or hoping. You know, sometimes it can be a little bit hit and miss with staffers. Sometimes you get somebody who's really enthusiastic, really excited to talk to you, ask a lot of questions, and those meetings are great. And sometimes you get somebody who's just a little bit already burned out from the day, is kind of, you know, doesn't seem really all that there. They're just trying to rush you out and, you know, hurry up and get the meeting done. So I just caution, don't be too disappointed. It's just, you know, they're very busy people, and you can always try again and, you know, keep engaging with them and building up that relationship. So keep trying. Okay, a few tips. It's good to do a little bit of research into the member to see if there's anything you need to thank them for. So things like if they've endorsed a bill recently, that's good for refuges. If they made a visit to your refuge recently, like in the last year, make sure you remind them of that and thank them for it, things like that. So do a little bit of research beforehand. You definitely always, if this is a new person you're meeting with, you definitely always want to start by asking if they've been to the refuge, if they're familiar with it, if they're in general familiar with the refuge system as a whole. That way you know where to start with your message. You know, if you can start at a more in-depth way, or if you really need to start at the basics. Okay, so in that conversation, you should also try and find out what their interests are that connect them to the refuge system. So it can be birding, hiking, hunting and angling, things like that. So try and figure that out, and then you can tailor your talking points to highlight those aspects of the refuge system. You, as folks on the ground who spend a lot of time on the refuge, have very good anecdotes and stories to tell that move people in a way that my like facts and figures can't really do. So it's important for you to kind of think about the stories that you have to tell about the refuge and why it's important to you, why it's important to your community, what kind of experiences you've had on the refuge that kind of puts this human element touch to it. Those stories make a lot of difference in building that relationship with members of Congress and having them remember you and having something that they can really imagine in their minds versus just, just the facts or just the figures. Okay, so have that short example or story that you can share that speaks to this issue. Also, of course, practice your talking points a little bit before going into a meeting. Actually practice saying the ask out loud. So it's clear, it's confident, it doesn't get lost in all the other mumbo jumbo you're talking about. Make sure the ask is very clear. And something I'll say as a former staffer myself, I really liked the interesting meetings that were, interesting, fun to talk about, interesting topics, but were very efficient, right? Stayed on topic. The ask was clear. The issue was laid out very clearly. Those were my most memorable meetings, and it made it easier for me to feel excited about talking with this person again, wanting me to like follow up and help them. Just like you want to be memorable for good reasons, and avoiding all those things that we said to avoid that would make the meeting maybe memorable for not as good of reasons. So yeah, make sure you're efficient. So another thing that staffers really, really appreciate are those hard facts and figures. Stories are excellent for one purpose. Hard facts and figures are excellent for another purpose. It makes it something tangible that they can share with a member of Congress or like other people in the office to illustrate why their office needs to care about the issue or your refuge. So it just makes their jobs easier when they can put down the facts and figures, 67% of this, or, the refuge generates X amount of dollars in revenue every year, things like that. So this second bullet here is like some examples of a couple tangible things you can talk about. Yeah, just really making it local. Yeah, just really illustrating really well why those offices need to care about the issue as much as we do. Okay. And like I said, you just tailor your talking points. We gave that example of law enforcement earlier. That, again, that's an issue that resonates with Republican offices. Some offices really prefer to, like if they're very active on climate, then you can tailor those talking points to talk about the benefits for combating climate change or climate resiliency or protecting biodiversity. Those talking points resonate better with other offices. Right, or maybe, yeah, like I said, they're hunters and anglers, so you talk about outdoor recreation access, things like that. So just research the background, figure out what types of things they're active on, and then tailor your talking points based on that. And then lastly, every meeting will be different. Just something to keep in mind. As much as you try to prepare beforehand, just also be prepared for it to go completely haywire. So every meeting will be different. Okay, what time are we at? 4:01, that's actually perfect. Okay, so we're gonna have you guys break out into the groups that you'll be meeting with tomorrow. Not everyone who's participating in the meetings this week were able to join this webinar, so just keep that in mind. I think Eden, if you can activate the breakout rooms, don't go into them yet, but For those who have meetings already scheduled or we're trying to get them scheduled, go ahead and jump into your breakout room in a minute here, not quite yet. And take that time to, once you're in there, yeah, make sure you all have the calendar invitation. Make sure you're introduce yourselves, familiarize yourself with the talking points in the run of show, and then think about what you want to say. And then definitely assign those roles. Make sure you know who the facilitator will be, who will take notes, who's going to do the follow-up email afterwards, and then figure out who will do the storytelling and who will, handle specific talking points here. And again, this is just guidance. It's not, I'm not making you follow this. It's just a way to guide you on how a meeting should typically run. And then, yeah, if you have time, still do a little bit of a practice run together. FYI, a Refuge Association staffer might be joining in your actual meeting, but we're not there to do any talking. We're just there to kind of listen in, be a resource if you need it. We just kind of want to pop in on a couple and see how things go. Not to make you nervous. It's just, we're just, trying to see how all the meetings go. Now, for those of you who are not going to be doing a congressional meeting this week, or maybe you're just doing a meeting by yourself, there aren't any other people in your meetings. Like I said, feel free to just hang out here with me in the general lobby. We can have any questions, we can do discussions, or feel free to practice on your own. Up to you, but we're gonna let these guys go into a breakout room for 15 minutes. You guys will get I think it was a 5-minute warning and then a 1-minute warning. And if you end early, feel free to leave the breakout room and come back to the lobby. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Let me share my screen again. Oh, there we go. Okay. Before we go into my last slide here, which is just kind of a closing slide, I want to get a little bit of feedback about how the breakout sessions went, if there are any remaining questions or clarifications I can provide before we move on to this last slide. Was it helpful? Things like that.
I could speak for our group in California. We are very frustrated and surprised that this is coming up so fast with so little preparation, although I see you put a lot of effort into it. We haven't had time to talk to each other. We barely even got introduced in that breakout room, and just so we're going to need to meet. I'm going to need permission to even do this, so we need to know things like, where's the list of talking points? Is that in the fact sheets that were sent by Corfa, which was very nice preparation, but I thought I'd have weeks to work on this.
Yeah, no, that's good feedback. And I appreciate that. And I fully understand. I know it kind of was a whirlwind of things. And the reason why things kind of moved a little bit slower than we would have hoped. Was hoping to get resources out to you a little sooner. Was hoping to make sure you had these meetings on your calendars a little sooner. It's just hard to make these meetings with Congress. They're just very slow in response. So most of these meetings didn't even come together until yesterday or this morning. That's how slow it was. And then on our end, it really is just was really hoping to get things out a bit sooner, and I apologize that it wasn't. Next time we do this, I do want to make sure that you have the resources that you need much more ahead of time.
And that's fine. And thank you for what you've done. It's incredible, but we just need to know what we can do to throw this together real quick. So if you have the list of talking points, where are they? That kind of thing.
Oh, you should have received it in the email that went out about an hour before.
Okay.
Yes, you should have access to that, and the schedule and the fact sheets were also included in that email. So let us know if you didn't get it. We'll make sure that you get it. Otherwise, it'll be sent out again in the follow-up email later today from this webinar.
Libby, this is Cheryl. You said you weren't reading the chat. I put this in the chat. we had one person who is included on our invitation, so I assume he'll be attending the Hill visit, who wasn't here, so it was hard for us to assign roles or decide who was going to do what. We decided we'd meet again tomorrow, hopefully with him included. And our meeting is on, our Hill visit is on Wednesday.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, hopefully, let's see. Yeah, hopefully you have an opportunity to connect. Otherwise, I think you were all, well, possibly not. Would it be helpful if we get all the groups that are together, if we make sure that you all get on an email chain so you can coordinate a little bit better before your meetings, especially for those who had people missing from their groups today? Because we
don't need that because he's on our board, I know, and have contact information for him, but there may be others who would benefit from that.
Sure. I think as good practice, we'll just do that and make sure everybody has the contact emails for everybody. So we'll just go ahead and do that.
That's a great idea because there were 2 people missing from our meeting for California.
Yeah, okay. Okay, we'll make sure to do that right after we're done with this webinar today. Okay.
And one other question, I maybe missed it right at the beginning, but will you be sending the slide deck out right away so we have that information? Okay,
yes.
Thank you.
Yep. As well as a recording of this webinar and all the fact sheets and stuff again that we sent out.
Thank you.
And Libby, how will we know if a member of the Refuge Association is going to be on the call? Because I assume we'll want those folks to be introduced as well.
Yes, so we have not had a chance to sit down and divvy it out yet, but we're not really planning to have a role in your meetings other beyond just saying, hi, this is who I am. And, we're just listening in because we really just want these meetings to be a chance for you all to talk and connect with your congressional offices. So we're just there to observe, really. So unfortunately, I don't have the list right now of who will be joining what, but we're just going to try and join whichever ones we can and just pop in.
Thank you.
Yeah. It sounds like Debbie, 2 of 3 people in the meeting did not know about the meeting. Yeah, Feinstein's office, I think we really didn't, that one, we didn't get a response about to our meeting request until yesterday afternoon, I think. So it came together very, very quickly. So unfortunately, that's just kind of how it goes with congressional offices. So again, I apologize for kind of the short notice on a lot of these things, but it's just kind of how congressional offices operate a little bit.
We're going to try to reach out to everybody and meet tonight and try to prepare something.
Okay.
And I just would like to remind folks that, if you want to do follow-up meetings during the congressional summer recess, remember on the Corfa website in the Resource Center under Advocacy, there's a kit telling you how to, request your meetings, going over a lot of the same things that Libby mentioned today.
Okay. Carissa, I see your email address. We'll make sure that gets updated. Becca, when is Refuge Weeks? Yes, so I wanted to highlight National Wildlife Refuge Week. This is another opportunity that you'll have to engage with your members of Congress and invite them out, or make sure that they're participating in some way to uplift refuges during that week. So Refuge Week always takes place on the first week of October every year. So if you can plan a little bit ahead for that, please do try and get your members of Congress out to your refuge. Otherwise, the Refuge Association will be sending out a toolkit again this year to help you all get involved, particularly on social media, to uplift refuges and educating about why they're so important. So yes, first week in October, keep an eye out for more resources about that in the coming months. Okay, Eden, thank you for sharing the links to all the resources in the chat. Thank you. Debbie, would somebody mind sending me Debbie's correct email address if the one that I had was spam?
I can do that.
Okay. Okay, Krista, how much time do we have in the meeting in general? So standard meeting times for offices is 30 minutes, and that is what we were able to get for all offices. So plan for 30 minutes. I know for those of you with bigger groups, it's going to be harder to manage that time frame, but hopefully you have a chance to kind of figure out the best way to be efficient with the talking points and making sure everybody gets a chance to be heard. And sometimes they say they only have 30 minutes, but then you get them talking and they're they'll stay on for longer. So yeah. Oh, okay, got your email address here. Thank you. Okay. All right, so seeing no more questions, I'm just going to quickly run through this last slide then. So yeah, this is another reminder about the Congressional Recess Action Kit that Corfa sent out. That has a bunch of resources for you, including email templates, things like that. So make sure you take a look at that and try and do whatever you can to get your member of Congress out to visit you during August. That would be excellent. It also includes a form that hopefully you will fill out after your, if that actually happens. So that way it comes back to me, I know that it happened, and I can see, how those kinds of meetings went. So FYI, that's part of it too. We talked about National Wildlife Refuge Week. Really just want to encourage you to continue engaging with your representatives even beyond virtual Hill days. Keep trying to do those in-district meetings, stay in contact with the staff that you connect with your newsletters, your updates, cool things happening on your refuge, things like that. Just stay in touch. That's all helpful for them. Oh, where did I go? Da, 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 da. Okay. Make sure you're subscribed to the Refuge Association's action alerts. A lot of good opportunities to participate and, commenting on regulations, doing outreach to members of Congress. Lots of things come through that way as well. You can write letters to the editor. You can make sure you're connected with the Quarterly Friends newsletter. It's called The Link. Join the Corfa Facebook group where I post every now and then on things we're up to. Yeah, there's just a few more ways to keep being involved in this stuff, but otherwise, hopefully these resources that you received today will be helpful for you all as you move forward with educating and advocating for the refuge system. So, oh, Thomas, do you recommend a PowerPoint or just speaking? Just speaking. PowerPoints usually aren't done in congressional meetings. So yeah, just speaking is good enough. Okay. I know we are 2 minutes over, so I'll stay on for a few more moments in case anyone has more questions, but for those of you who are ready to hop off, I just want to thank you again for your interest in being advocates for the refuge system, for taking the time out of your day today to do this training. I hear your feedback, and as we do more trainings like this, I know what we can do better next time, so thank you for that feedback. And yeah, if you have more questions about your meetings tomorrow, things like that, just reach out to me. Otherwise, you will be hearing from me again tonight with all these resources, the recording, the slides, and more information about making sure you all have emails for each other. So thank you again. good luck in all your meetings the rest of this week. And for those who don't have a meeting yet, hopefully I can get something on the schedule for you. Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to stay on for a few more minutes for anyone who has any lingering questions.